everyone. Welcome to Living One. I'm your host, Olivia Crossman. Living One is Kerulos' monthly webinar series, now in its fifth year. With guest speakers from around the world, we listen in to how people are bringing their ethics, minds, and lives into alignment with nature for earth and animal liberation and revitalization. We ask the question, we know what's wrong, but what does right look like? Most importantly, how do we get from wrong to right? When there is so much to change and to heal, where do we begin? What's the first step? What is the path each of us can undertake to make positive, deep, transformative change, not only as individuals, but as a collective whole? What is ours to do? Let's talk about it. This year, Living One hosts and hears from individuals who have forged a range of unique and inspiring paths to help transform and heal Earth, animals, and human society. Join us for another year of rich conversations to learn how, individually and in community, we can take the necessary, concrete, timely steps towards a right world, a world of peace and wellness for all Earth beings. Our guest today is David Michelson. David is one of the chief petitioners for Initiative Petition 28, a proposed ballot measure for the Oregon 2026 election that would ask voters if they are ready to end the slaughter, hunting, and experimentation of animals statewide. Inspired by prior social movements, David believes that bringing the question of animal liberation to the ballot will help stimulate a radical transformation in how we collectively view the animals currently exempt from the same legal protections granted to our companions. David began working on building the foundations for this campaign in 2020 after recognizing the untapped potential of ballot initiatives to accelerate the animal rights movement. David's activism is informed by his practice of nonviolent communication and participation in the Plum Village community of engaged Buddhism. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all currently on various Indigenous lands. I'm currently on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, which includes the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. This land exists also as a place of trade with other Indigenous communities, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. The Kerulos Center for Nonviolence is located on the homelands of the grizzly bear, Takelma, Daku Bedite, coyote, coho salmon, golden eagle, and gray wolf. Finally, we ask that all of us participate with full respect and attention to each other in the spirit of peace and wisdom that Living One seeks to foster. So without further ado, we welcome David.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate the introduction and for having me on. So I see some familiar faces as well, and I'm very excited. Hopefully this information is, some of it might be repeat for people who I've already talked to or people who are already involved in the campaign, and some of you are. But I'm really excited to get to share about IP28. So I guess a little bit of more background. I live in Portland, Oregon. Like was mentioned, I practice nonviolent communication and part of the Plum Village tradition. I think I bring both of those to the campaign, and I'll talk a little bit more about nonviolent communication in particular a little bit later on when I get to theory of change. So for logistics sake, IP28 stands for Initiative Petition, and Initiative Petition 28, we were the 28th initiative to be submitted for the 2026 election cycle. So that's where the name comes from. It is a little unusual to be such a high number early on because we are actually the first initiative to start collecting signatures for 2026. But a lot of people had submitted some initiatives quite early. That's where that number comes from. It is different than a bill in that this is citizen initiated. So myself, I wrote the initial version that was for the 2022 campaign. And ever since then, when we've revised it, our team has come together and made improvements. So this most recent one was a collaborative effort among the whole team that we submitted. We put it together. We based it on prior ballot initiatives, taking some of their legal expertise and put it forward, as opposed to a bill, which is something that is put together by representatives and introduced into law that way. So this is really, it's a unique opportunity we have. Only 21 states have a citizen-initiated ballot measure process in the country, so not even half, unfortunately. Oregon was, however, the second to introduce this after Utah, which started in 1900. We were in 1902, so hopefully some fun facts for people interested in Oregon history. We are We do sometimes lead the way, and we hope to be a leader in animals as well. So IP28 is also known as the Peace Act. That's the actual name of the initiative, the People for the Elimination of Animal Cruelty Exemptions Act. And we take that name because it describes very accurately what the initiative does on a legal level. It removes exemptions that are already built in to Oregon's animal cruelty laws. Oregon is not alone in this, having exemptions. Every state has exemptions from our animal cruelty laws, and that allows us to live in a world where some animals are protected and some animals are not. So, for instance, in Oregon, animal abuse is defined as the intentional, knowing, and reckless injury of an animal. When I hear that definition, that makes sense to me, and as I'm sure it makes sense to many others. It's very intuitive. If you're intentionally injuring an animal, that seems like I would call it abuse as well. But of course, we intentionally injure them when we slaughter them. We intentionally injure them when we experiment on them. We intentionally injure them when we hunt them. The reason that those are not considered crimes of animal cruelty or animal abuse in this particular case is because Oregon state law has a list of exemptions. It says the following activities do not apply to our animal cruelty laws, and those include treatment of livestock being transported, animals involved in rodeos or exhibitions. All poultry animals are exempt, just as an entire species. Animals subject to good animal husbandry practices, which are defined as really any common practice in the industry. So it's, in a way, an industry defined exemption. The killing of all livestock animals, so called livestock as defined under state law. Fishing, hunting, and trapping is an exemption. Wildlife management is an exemption. Scientific research is an exemption. Pest control is an exemption, and any forms of handling and training techniques are exemptions. So clearly, I listed quite a few of those exemptions. The only animals that remain are our companion animals, the ones we keep in our homes. For them, it would be animal abuse to intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly kill them. The one Actually, the one other exemption I didn't list is for veterinary practices. That is one exemption that would remain if IP28 were to pass. All of the rest that I mentioned would be removed. That's the main impact that IP28 has legally. It says it just amends our animal cruelty laws so that those exemptions are no longer there. And when you take out those exemptions, now the killing of livestock would be considered animal abuse. Experimenting on animals would be considered animal abuse because it involves an intentional, knowing, and reckless injury. It does not ban accidental injury because under the current definition of abuse, that does not cover accidents. It only covers that intentional, knowing, and reckless harm, which is important. We're not changing how Oregonians have already decided animal abuse is this. We're just changing who that definition applies to, who that coverage applies to. The veterinary exemption we left in because we did not want to criminalize things like spaying, neutering, and vet administered euthanasia. Importantly, the types of so-called euthanasia that happens on farms would be criminalized. So a farmer could not decide, oh, this animal is sick enough that I don't want to put forward any medical care or a treatment. We're just going to end their life. That would not be something that a farmer could choose to do on their own. But a veterinarian could still come in and if there are cancerous dogs and cats, there are circumstances where some people do genuinely try to alleviate suffering. Unfortunately, the term euthanasia is commonly used not to refer to alleviation of suffering anymore. So I even don't like saying the word, unfortunately. But there are those circumstances where a veterinarian would be able to come in. It would also create a new exemption, IP28, for self-defense, because although there's never been a history, it's not currently exempt and no one has been prosecuted for injuring an animal in self-defense. Given our initiative goes pretty far, we wanted to make clear that we were not criminalizing that particular type of injury. The reason why I think it's important to do something like that is it shows we really have thought through what this initiative would do. We take it very seriously. We wanted to craft it as though it could be implemented because we want it to be implemented. It is not, we're not doing this just to get a rise out of people, just to get a conversation even. We are really trying to craft something that could change the world for the better. In addition to the main effect of removing those exemptions, this also criminalizes breeding practices as sexual assault. So in Oregon right now, our animal cruelty laws, and I should say this also applies to most other states, our animal sexual assault laws are really based more on the sin of bestiality. It kind of comes out of that framework where the part that society has viewed as wrong is a human getting sexual gratification from engaging in an animal with an animal sexually. So the law is actually written so that it only counts as sexual assault if, when you come into contact with an animal's mouth, anus, or genitals, you're doing it for your own sexual gratification. It's written in there. Now, of course, there's no reference to a victim in this case at all, and there's certainly no reference to the victim's gratification or trying to incite such gratification. What this does is it says any forced contact with an animal's mouth, anus, or genitals for either the arousal of either party or for the purpose of impregnation or masturbation explicitly would be considered animal sexual assault. We are, again, trying to say that we want animals to be protected from injury, from sexual violation, from forms of neglect, and this would include that. So artificial insemination practices in particular would be banned if IP28 were to pass. Two things that were added most recently to the 2026 initiative. The first is that we created an alternative to incarceration. So right now, under our current laws, animal cruelty is either a misdemeanor or a felony, depending on the level of severity. Most people on the campaign are very critical of our current criminal system, based largely on retributive justice rather than restorative justice. One of the ways that nonviolent communication came in to this campaign is trying to see, well, if we really are trying to lower rates of animal cruelty, right? We know that our current system of incarceration typically leads to higher rates of recidivism, creating more crime rather than less. We wanted to say, if this were to pass, it would still ban the state from giving out licenses for slaughterhouses to operate, giving out hunting licenses. It would stop at a systemic level, the animal cruelty, the allowing of animal cruelty. On an individual level, we're not interested in throwing a bunch of people in jail. That's not our goal. And so what we did was, there's already a state law that says if you violate animal cruelty laws, you may be prohibited from owning animals in the future. We strengthened that so that rather than something you can add on top of a misdemeanor or felony, instead of a misdemeanor or felony, you can agree to not own animals for a period of either 5 or 15 years, depending on severity, and engage in supervised animal care based on the animals that were harmed. So if you had harmed a companion animal working and volunteering supervised with a humane society, if you had harmed a farmed animal working volunteering with a partnered farmed animal sanctuary, something like that, to try and rebuild empathy, sort of working off the theory that if you engage in positive behaviors towards someone else, you're likely to then feel more positive feelings towards that person, the feelings following the behavior. All just to say we wanted to create an initiative that very clearly demonstrates we care about everyone involved and we're interested in that restorative process. And I'm happy to answer more questions about those too if they come up. The last main thing we added was a humane transition fund. So we created, if passed, it would direct the legislature to set up a fund. Any money that currently goes towards killing animals or any activity that would be banned under the passage of IP28 would have to go into this fund to help pay for things like job retraining, income assistance, animal care, wildlife management, like conservation efforts in particular. That fund would then be controlled by a transition council, which has a large number of representatives on it. We really wanted to include everyone who would possibly be impacted. We have spots for representatives from the 9 tribal governments. We have from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, from groups that are in Oregon specifically focused on job retraining already, some of those programs that might need to be set up, farmed animal sanctuaries, humane societies, some people who are just directly impacted, so farmers and those who are currently out hunting, would be asked to join and participate in making sure the funds are used, as long as it is funding strategies that are now legal under IP 28, alternatives rather than killing animals. We don't know what those alternatives might look like for different communities. We want them to be involved as long as we hold that line of they can't involve killing animals. So that's a broader overview of the initiative itself and what it does. As for a bit of a timeline, IP 13 was the initial predecessor, which started November of 2020, so just about 4 years ago, a little over that now. It was for the 2022 election cycle, and we collected about 2,000 signatures. It was a small attempt that I started. Isaac, who's another chief petitioner right now, joined on pretty quickly, and we were kind of in it together for a little while. It grew to about 5 or so volunteers and activists that were working on it. And once we started recruiting more people, we actually expanded. We got 2 really important volunteers from Eugene. We decided to continue for 2024. And so we made some revisions. We submitted a new initiative in March of 2022 called IP3. And midway through that election cycle, we got a round of funding. We got $50,000 grant. It was all of our transactions are publicly available. Owen, who is associated with a group called Fauna, decided to give us a chance and fund us. And following that, we got another $50,000 grant by the Karuna Foundation. And so that allowed us to start paying for paid petitioners, which was a huge game changer for us. We ended up collecting just under 40,000 signatures by August 30th of 2023. But we did decide to suspend the campaign in September and delay until 2026. The reason we decided to do that is we were worried that we were not collecting signatures fast enough to qualify. It was near the end of the summer of 2023. Signatures were due midway through the following summer. We figured the winters, we had never petitioned in the winter before. We figured it would slow down. My big concern was that even though we were very grateful for the 100,000 we had just gotten, as well as another 10,000 from DXE, we were worried that with that tight budget, we would almost barely have enough to qualify, even if, and we were going slow enough that we would have to pick up the pace from what we were doing. If we spent all of those funds and didn't end up making it, those signatures can't roll over to the next election cycle. And I thought that the risk of using up those funds and putting in that much more energy for something that gets close but doesn't finally pass, I was just very nervous, very scared about that outcome. So shared my concerns with the group. We decided to save all the funding we had. We still had about $60,000 left of that funding, and we can roll over. There is a process in place in the state for any money from one petition committee to go to the next. So although we couldn't move signatures, we could at least roll funding. And we decided to prepare so that we would start early, because now Oregon is one of the few states that allows for 2 full years to collect signatures. Most states, or I should say, at least a handful of states, have only a 6-month period to collect signatures, which is much harder, especially if you're a grassroots organization. But we wanted to take advantage of the full 2 years. So we started preparing right then, as soon as we disbanded IP3, started revising IP28. We submitted it. We got approval to start collecting signatures this past summer, July 8th. And since then, we've gotten back up to where we were, about 40,000 signatures, but more than a year earlier in terms of timeline. We really are, I think we have about 19 and a half months left until the deadline, and we're already at 40,000, as opposed to being near the end of really the last full summer before the deadline is due. So that is where we're at right now. Our goal is to get to 150,000 signatures. The legal requirement is 117,000, but it's very typical for about 80% of signatures to be accepted and 20% rejected due to either not being registered to vote or illegible, whatever the case might be. And so we have until July 2nd, 2026 to do that. And we really ramped up over the summer. We are slowing down a bit over the winter and are hoping that with enough support, we can continue and really ramp up again coming in the spring. Um, I do want to share a bit about the theory of change now that you have an idea. You know what it is now, maybe why we're doing it. One of the most common stories I share and inspirations I share is about the women's suffrage movement. I take a lot of inspiration from this movement because they used the ballot initiative process to get the 19th Amendment, to get the right to vote. And in Oregon in particular, it was on the ballot 6 times before it finally passed. And hearing that, when I first heard that, I had a huge amount of inspiration because it takes persistence. I don't remember exactly the Noam Chomsky quote, but it was something along the lines of, if you go to a protest, that's great, but if you go once and go home, the powers that be, that's fine. They're not bothered by that. What they're bothered by, what they can't handle, is if you continue to go back, if you learn new things and you persist. And they were persistent. If anything, I do try to be persistent. I think even the people who maybe aren't a fan of what I do will still say I'm persistent. Um, and so that's what our campaign is trying to embody. We want to go in knowing that this isn't something we want to get on the ballot once. We're aware that this is unlikely to pass in 2026. We were always aware that this is unlikely to pass. That is our rationale for putting it on the ballot, is not we think it's going to pass in 2026. I always make sure that people who are joining the campaign are aware of that. We think this will require many efforts, many initiatives in the future to really shift our culture away from killing animals. When women's suffrage was first voted on in Oregon in 1884, it received just 28% of the vote. So I'm not sure if people here are familiar with the slaughterhouse ban in Denver. That received 35% of the vote. Already more popular at banning slaughterhouses in Denver than giving women the right to vote, which is sort of a strange thought to hold. It took 6 attempts in Oregon and 54 ballot measures for women's suffrage in different states, many states, multiple times before the 19th Amendment was finally ratified. A thing that I also shared recently in our newsletter is that there were 11 different presidential administrations between when they first started these women's suffrage ballot measures and when the 19th Amendment was finally ratified. And I share that because certainly the conditions can become more or less favorable to our work, but people are in prior movements still persisted, and it did not stop them when these administrations changed and became more or less favorable. And I think the same thing needs to be true for us, that we aren't dissuaded from our strategies and our tactics, even when conditions change, as they tend to do. A quote that I also wanted to share that I find really inspirational for the campaign is from Gustav Landauer, who was a German anarchist who was killed in 1919. He said, "You cannot awaken someone if you do not approach them as if they were not sleeping." And the reason I like this is because our campaign is asking for what we want. We're asking for a very radical thing: to end killing animals, to ban slaughter, hunting, experimentation. I want to awaken people to the reality of how we're treating animals and my view that I want to protect those animals' needs. I want to cause this system change. I think there are others that really share those same values, but they won't recognize what we're going towards if we don't ask for what we want. If we're honest with them about what we want, I think they will actually start to, some of them will hear that and join in. They'll say, "Oh, that makes sense to me. Oh, that is actually the world that I want as well." I appreciate the thumbs and claps, and I'm curious to hear more from folks about that in particular. The other quote that I'll share that inspires me, and I shared this in the most recent article for our website, is by Harold Whiteman. He said, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go and do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." And I like that because I'm joining this campaign because it meets my needs for authenticity, it inspires me to action. Maybe not everyone is inspired to do this work, but I certainly am. And I think it's important for us to do the work that we are feeling inspired to do. And it's at least my theory and hope that there are a lot of people out there that when we get on the ballot, when they hear that people are doing this, fighting for this, it'll inspire people to join, to help us do this again in Oregon, to do it in other states. That really is my view, that if we get on the ballot, once we do it once, it'll be easier to do it a second time. It'll be easier to do it a third time. More and more people will join in, and that'll become the new normal, asking for abolition and nothing less. Um, what's funny is, although I have developed quite a strong theory for why I think this is effective, it did not actually start because I thought it was effective. For maybe some fun background, I had previously, right before coming up with this idea, I worked as a paid petitioner for Measure 110 in Oregon, which was a drug decriminalization initiative, and the psilocybin legalization initiative. Just as a paid circulator, I came out to Oregon, got a job, and I was doing a research project at the same time for a class on human sexuality. And the presentation was on how violence between species tends to increase or lead to violence within a species. So violence against animals leading to, and it was specifically sexual violence given the content of the class. And I just happened to read about our animal cruelty laws, and I saw the list of exemptions, and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be so easy if these were just removed? It would be so different. And so I thought, well, let's do a ballot initiative, because I was just collecting signatures to try to remove that and see what happens. And as I went, I started learning more about the strategy, but it really did lead with just simply that inspiration. It helped me come alive. It gave me something that I was inspired to do, and I had faith that things would kind of come into place. And so far, there have certainly been struggles, but it largely has come into place. So I wanted to end my presentation part by talking about how to get involved. So there are a lot of ways, depending on where you are and what capacity and interest you might have. Joining the campaign, if you're in Oregon, it's a great way to, and actually I should say, even if you're not, if you really do want to participate regularly, our meetings are hybrid meetings. We do have some people who help with signature verification from San Diego, and from, I believe we have someone who's organizing an event now who's based in New York, I think, on the East Coast. Very, easy way to get involved, joining our group chats and our regular meetings. If you are in Oregon or nearby, Vancouver, Washington, for instance, and would like to help petition, of course, the main metric for whether we get on the ballot is whether we get enough signatures. So helping collect those signatures is a huge contribution. We are also largely volunteer run. So one of the reasons we've kept our costs down, we tend to spend, I think it's last I checked, it was $1.70 per signature is what our costs ended up working out to be. We don't pay individuals per signature. We pay just an hourly wage. But we calculate just so we know how much money is spent about on each signature. And that is very low, $1.70. In Oregon, I wish I had pulled up that data. It can range somewhere from like $5 to $20 per signature, depending on how efficient the campaigns are. So we're well below what the averages are. And that is partially because we are volunteer run. We don't pay for administrative roles. All of the money goes straight to the paid petitioners themselves. And so if you are interested, we have, right now, a volunteer who manages payroll, a volunteer who manages the events calendar, volunteers who create social media graphics. If there is something that you feel compelled to do that you think would be helpful for the campaign, volunteers to help with those kinds of tasks are really valuable. Spreading the word about the campaign. Right now, we are in a huge fundraising push. We are applying for more grants. We are trying to get more monthly donors so that we can have those funds for the spring and summer. We have spent the vast majority of the funding we've had so far over this past summer, and planning on spending it through the winter to at least maintain some amount of petitioning. But we are trying to get the funds to continue in the spring and summer. The more people who know about this, the more connections we have, the more resources we're able to mobilize. So that is also a really important way that people can help. And like I mentioned, we are right now trying to improve our grassroots donations. We'd relied pretty much exclusively on a couple smaller grants, and we are up to, I think it's about $500 a month in monthly donors, which over the course of the 20 or so months that we have left, if we got to 1,000, that'd be $20,000. It's a big chunk. We anticipate that with about 100 to 150,000, we'd be pretty close to covered. So even though it's a lot for one person, we actually think that it is something feasible that we can do with grassroots fundraising. Yeah, I think that is the main points I wanted to get across in a presentation. And hopefully that was not too repetitive for people who have already heard. And I'm really interested to hear what questions people have, because those tend to be very stimulating.
Thank you so much, David. That was so informative, and everything that you shared about this being your passion and something that just lights you up is very aligned with this series. That's exactly what we're hosting people to talk about, the things that motivate them and really inspire them, because you're exactly right, and that quote speaks to it so well about people needing to do exactly what they're here to do. And so thank you for sharing all of that, and the information and your personal arc with it is really interesting and so inspiring, and got my fingers crossed for you. But yes, if anyone has any questions or comments or things they'd like to share, we have plenty of time for that now, so I will open it up. Yeah, hi, Jack.
Yeah, hi. Just a comment, a gushing comment of love and appreciation for David's bright light. I spoke to him on the phone. There's two people here because at the moment, the thing I want to do and can do is help spread the word. I just think this is a brilliant, simple, clear, huge ranging initiative that you can't lose the argument. Of course, as vegans here, you can't lose the argument anyway, but it frames it brilliantly. I definitely spent a lot of time talking and strategizing, and it's such an effective strategy. Hi, are you against being cruel to animals? Well, yes, I am. And then rather than getting into, well, you shouldn't be eating this and all the other street arguments, which can be effective, just to have, well, sign this petition. No wonder it's efficient. It's only $1.70. That people like, well, yeah, I'm against that. Well, here, we just want to make it for everything, for all animals in the state of Oregon. How simple. I hope it spreads to other states. And again, I just, so many of your quotes, and of course I didn't know that you had the the Buddhist haircut, but of course you do. And Plum Village and Thich Nhat Hanh and Marshall Rosenberg, and like, oh my God, I'm just, you're whatever, 150 years younger than me, and I'm inspired. You light my fire, which is all good. So I appreciate the Kerulos Center, I've never heard about, for sponsoring this. I'm excited to see other people here. And yeah, go, go, go. Fantastic. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jack. That was inspiring in and of itself. And you're absolutely right. I think you captured a lot of what a lot of people are feeling right now about that David's presentation and the
Well,
petition.
I'll jump in and say I have questions later, but I have to say, yes, it was so brilliant. Just what you said, Jack. It's so simple. I'll just real quick, I wrote this book called Carnivore Minds about sentience and, and animals and everything. And when it was going to come out, I talked to our nonprofit attorney who's local. I mean, he's Oregonian and very much committed vegan, et cetera. And I said, I'm going to use this to leverage a campaign to ban hunting in Jackson County. That's where we are, right? And he said, well, I don't think that's a good idea, Gay. And, what I mean is that it's this sort of tangential approach, just like you said, Jack, and I think that that's brilliant and beautiful, and I'll stop, but I just wanted to say, I think you're also reaching a depth of a person, before they start thinking, it's just in their heart and their soul. And the spontaneous response is beautiful. So anyways, I'll ask questions later, but thank you.
Thank you, Gay. Yeah, go for it.
Hi. Hey, David, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, hi. Hey, I think we met. Did you present on ballot measures at ALC last year?
Yes,
Oh,
yeah, I did.
okay, that was you. Okay, yeah, then we met. Great job then, great job now. So
Okay, I appreciate it. I enjoyed that presentation a lot. It was very interactive.
yeah. Sharing everything you learned in there, and sure enough, we were working on a ballot measure. Here we were, Measure J. So this initiative, fully support it, but I wonder. I mean, you're really swinging for the fences.
Yeah.
You know that
Yeah.
expression, right? I mean, this is like, let's get rid of every type of exemption. And so basically, when I kind of I study psychology and marketing
Mhm.
communications things, I'm kind of wondering it's like an equal opportunity offender in the sense that like you're going to piss off fishermen and naturalists. You're going to piss off anyone who eats meat, or it's basically going to piss off everyone, who has any kind of anything to do with animals other than those who really think about it and go, wow, we shouldn't be hurting them. So, I mean, if a ballot measure for slaughterhouses, which is the most hated of the things, cannot pass, and even outlawing CAFOs, which is like one of the second most hated things, gets soundly defeated, do you think a swing for the fences measure, I mean, is the intent here really just to get people's awareness open and talking and thinking about it, like with the suffragette movement, like, oh, women should vote, but it took, years and decades, for all this to come through. That's one question. I guess the second one is, are you able first to get the petition on the ballot, and then can you modify the language at all so that it's, I don't know, more focused on one issue than another, I guess, to increase chances of passage?
Yeah, I think maybe starting with it kind of reiterates a little bit about why we're doing this. Right now, I think people want authenticity and consistency more than ever. And what I like, in addition to our campaign asking for what I'm getting the opportunity to ask for what I want, and we get to ask for what we want. It is also very honest and authentic from the receiver's perspective. Sometimes when people are advocating for smaller change, I think those who are fearful of that change can see through that they're not asking for the things that they want. I think there becomes tension when we advocate for better animal conditions, and then someone says, well, wait, you really want to like run us out of business, and then they respond, no, we don't want that, we just want this one reform. I think the opposition, so to speak, I think they see through that we really do want this world. If that makes sense, I think the genuineness, the authenticity is actually going to help make it more effective in the long run. It does. There are a lot of people, who this would impact, and we try to share very openly that we want to meet everyone's needs, which is why we do the transition fund, or why we spend effort putting that in, why we use a lot of communication around. We're just trying to find alternative strategies that don't involve harming animals. We don't want people to be pissed off, is what I'm trying to say. We know that might happen. It certainly has happened and will continue to happen. But our goal is always to try to refocus on meeting needs. We're very ideologically consistent, and I think that's another thing people appreciate in addition to the authenticity, is that if we are saying that this is a harm, if we are saying that we are against killing animals, we're against it for any of the reasons for human exploitation. We want all of it to end, and we want all of it to end now, not in 10 years from now, even though we know it will take a while. One of the other aspects of IP28 is that it would take effect within 30 days if passed, and that's just the shortest allowable time by Oregon's constitution. And the reason why I always advocate for that, even though conversations among the team have come up, well, why not put in a 2-year transition period? I think it goes to that ideological consistency of, we're saying this is a horrible thing that's happening. We're saying it's violence and we want to end it. Why would we willingly end it any later than we can? I just think that consistent messaging, even if initially it might cause or it might stimulate some fear and some upset, I think people do actually, it meets their needs for respect and to be kind of understood in a way. At least that's my theory. Your other point, I do think that not any change, but most changes will take about the same amount of time. It's just a matter of how much time are we spending advocating for the change we actually want. So like to ban factory farming, I think would take, if we really were just persistently trying to do that, it would take the same amount of time as banning killing animals, I think. And maybe that's a little wild to think, but I really do think we would spend so much time getting one change when we could be spending that same amount of time getting to a different end, if that makes sense.
So on that, so I guess you're not able to change the
Oh,
language of the ballot measure as you have more learnings through more interactions over the next year, year and a half, or whatever. Or when does it get set in stone?
thank you for, I forgot about that part. So
Yeah.
it is the text is set in stone from our perspective. We cannot change the initiative once it's been reviewed by the Attorney General and they've created the ballot title. If that were to change, it would be a whole new initiative. That said, once initiatives are passed, at least in Oregon, the legislature, they're allowed to make changes to it. They're actually allowed to outright veto it, which is, California is very different. If you get something passed, the legislature can't even touch it unless they get a new vote from the public. Oregon is not like that. So what I actually find inspiring about that, if the system functioned the way I would envision it, is if citizens proposed an initiative and it got passed and they realized there was some flaw that wasn't working as intended, the legislature has the authority to change it and to improve it in line with what the public wants. One of the reasons why I recently voted in favor for Measure 118, the Oregon rebate campaign, is because I was supporting the idea of putting a tax on large corporations to fund individual taxpayers. When it came out that there would be a negative impact on the state budget, the organizers, the chief petitioners, said we would be open to helping make those changes so that impact doesn't happen. And the legislature, this was not talked about really, has full ability to add a little line in the text that says the checks will be smaller in order to offset any budgetary impacts. That would have, I think, been what our representatives are really, that's their job, in my opinion, is to do the will of the public. And so for our initiative, similarly, if there are unintended impacts that are not in alignment with our mission, it says in the initiative very clearly that we want it to be interpreted with our intent in mind. And the representatives could alter things, but we ourselves can't alter it. That is set in stone.
Leah, you had your hand up.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi, David.
Hi, it's nice to see you.
Great to see you in person. Yeah, we talked. I work for In Defense of Animals, and I pushed to do an article on ballot initiatives, mainly so that I could talk about IP28 because most people just don't know about it yet, and because that's what fires me up. I'd like to point out that hi, Jan, by the way, and in regards to what you brought up, and the two ballot initiatives, the ban slaughterhouses in Denver, ban factory farms in Sonoma County. The one in Denver to ban slaughterhouses passed with 35% of the vote. The factory farming ban passed with 15%. So what I think is so necessary in the vegan movement is for us to be real and honest with the public and educate the public about what is really happening inside all animal farming, not just factory farming, and inside the slaughterhouses. The exploitation is what's at the root of this, which is what IP28 is getting to. Now, the fact that people are going to be reading through these details and this has never been done before. Wait, sexual violation, masturbation, sexual assault? What are you talking about? People don't know. They don't know. And so if we just continue trying to ban just factory farms, not mentioning slaughterhouses, and saying that small farms are okay in the campaign, that just continues to give people the impression, oh, well, as long as we treat them better, then we can still exploit them and kill them. That's not making change fast enough, in my opinion. I think that's been done already. Most animal protection organizations are advocating for better welfare, and we need to stop factory farming without saying, no, we need to stop slaughterhouses. We need to stop all of it. And yes, only a tiny percentage of people believe that, but it's because most people are not educated on what's really going on behind the scenes. And how are they going to be against it unless they're told, unless they're educated? So that's why I'm just in such support of this. And I think it's so groundbreaking. And we do need to tell the truth, because people respect, in my experience, People respect that. Even if they get angry, they know that you're being real with them. And if you're saying, please sign this petition to ban a factory farm, and I'm not going to tell you that I'm a vegan and that I'm against all animal exploitation, those people are picking up on that. They know that, and they lose respect. That's been my experience. Well, you're against factory farming, but you're okay if I continue eating animals, yeah? But you're not willing to say that you're against it. It's just, I don't think it's a strong enough message. So I think we need to tell the truth, because there's so few people and organizations out there that are doing that. So why not just ask for the world we want, which is common decency and common sense? We don't want animals to be tormented. And the basis of the torment is the exploitation in the first place. So thank you for listening.
One thing that, Leah, what you were saying reminded me of is just with at least nonviolent communication, it comes up, although it's certainly not exclusive to that, being really objective and clear with our requests. And I do think that the term factory farm is not a clearly defined term. When we're advocating for it, it's not always clear what we're advocating for the abolition of. And one thing I like about IP 28 is it is clear. We're asking to not kill animals, to no longer have slaughtering at all, no hunting, no experimentation. It has a very clear, precise definition, which I think does resonate with people.
I think that's so important, yeah, because the vast majority of people all agree, of meat eaters all say, I'm against factory farming, and if I sign this thing that says I'm against factory farming, that makes me feel better and like I'm doing a nice thing for animals. Now I'm going to go buy this nice local, organic, humane certified animal product. So yeah, why not just talk about what really happens behind the scenes of all of it?
Thank you, Leah. Jack, do you want to respond to Leah? We have a bunch of questions in the chat I also want to get to, but you can go ahead first.
It's 2 points, just reinforcing what was said. I'm David's the brilliant strategist, comes up with the original thought. I'm just the commenter. I'm the TV personality who just repeats things so the audience gets it, because I'm the audience. I don't pick up the stuff super quick. One is about the genuineness that both David and Leah spoke. There's another example in the current political realm, which is for some reason on our minds these days, of an example of a politician who was the only politician willing to actually, well, in my opinion, speak the truth.
Bernie.
And he was the oldest guy, and his name is Bernie. And he seemed to do rather well with the young people who appreciated his honesty, even though he didn't look the part. And the brilliant women politicians who were part of the system, Hillary and now Kamala, God bless them. I mean, I voted for them both. I love them both. But they were, hedging the bets and be careful and don't do this. And it wasn't effective anyway. Arguably, I mean, it's very complicated and who really knows, but my opinion is to some degree of Bernie was speaking the truth. David's IP 28 just speaks the truth. Let's not torture and harm any animals. And then to Leah's point, it does bring out the educational aspects in a brilliant strategic way. Second and last point, another activist, George Werthner, who is a mentor of mine, 10 years older than me, about wilderness and about cattle industry stuff. He made the argument in an hour-and-a-half podcast I heard a decade ago, and I never forgot it. Activists, and this is a wonderful conversation of just a handful of activists here who are going to bring back information to our communities. His point was activists have to speak what I'll call 100%. This is the truth. This is all the truth, the whole truth. No animals in society should be tortured, even though we're all in a haze. We're all conditioned. I wasn't vegan until into my 50s because I didn't know any better. No one told me. It wasn't out there. So this pushes that message out there, and I think can have positive effect. Activists go 100%, and then politicians' job is to then buffer it, bring people together, make compromise, make coalitions. A necessary job. Not one I'm good at, because I like to speak my mind and the whole truth. But before IP 28, there was no ballot measure that spoke the whole truth. For heaven's sake, we can't give up on this one because it's the only one that speaks the whole truth. That's why it's so valuable. Thanks for letting me ramble on.
Thank you, Jack. Yes, absolutely. Yes, okay. And then we have a couple questions in this chat. Steve, would you like to ask your question? I see you.
I do, yeah, thanks. I didn't know how this worked.
No worries.
I've been stewing on a anti-harassment bill, which is what Michael has been actually talking about, which includes not harassing not sexually abusing animals, which basically we have laws against bestiality in the state of Massachusetts, not incarcerating wild animals from different countries and putting them in our laboratories. But I don't mention animals. I just mention the acts that people do, not going after wildlife, cutting them, beating them, or running them over with snow machines, what are they called, snowmobiles. I'm curious how to get that from just a bunch of words to something which is before the public and before the legislature. And I'm not really sure how to go about doing that. I'd like to join in with Michael. I don't have any contact information on his campaign, and also broaden it out to Massachusetts, and also broaden out. I've heard Michael talk about broadening it out to laboratory animals. I haven't heard anybody else really saying anything other than CAFOs or slaughterhouses, which it's just one small segment. And whether it's to compartmentalize it into animals that are being used for their fashion, animals that are being used for experimentation, animals that are using for food, and maybe that's the way of going. But I think that should be a all or nothing type of thing, and run with it. Yes. Thank you for listening. I'm looking for feedback. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, it sounded like what you were sharing was related to that question about help drafting a bill with animal organizations, legislators. I don't know if this is helpful to hear, but one of I briefly mentioned we had looked at other ballot initiatives to model our own off of, and one of them was Measure 110, the drug decriminalization initiative that I happened to have been working on. When I looked through the text, the main thing that it did was it amended state law. And so it just had section by section, it said, if passed, amend this to say this instead. And you just italicize some words and you put it in brackets, and then it gets rid of it. And then it was just so simple. And so I took that same formatting. I took the beginning section that laid out purpose. I took the end section that had like a bit on severability, kind of just legal stuff that were typically included in initiatives. And I kept those things. So we didn't have lawyers initially helping. We have, I'm very grateful that Marianne Sullivan did look over one of our versions for IP. Forget it was IP3 or IP28. When we made one set of revisions, we did reach out to her to look over it, and I'm very grateful for that. But the initial version and most of the edits were just made by us on the team, trying to be really diligent and make sure we weren't doing anything that would have any unintended consequences. But there are groups. The one I'm most familiar with, Animal Defense Partnership, ADP, I think is the acronym. They're more with helping nonprofits get set up. I don't know if they would have their own expertise in, and I'm happy to send that information. But they might know other lawyers interested in helping create ballot initiatives. Certainly, yeah, I'm sure there's people out there.
Just real quickly, the way wording is, or the way you're talking about is, you have to weave your way through all these different bills to find the spaghetti where the spaghetti ends. Like, for instance, in Massachusetts, we ended dog racing, but dog racing is still in the laws as existing. It's just beside horse racing. It's not really gotten rid of yet. It's still there with horse racing. So you have to weave and get rid of that language too.
Yeah, we had to be very diligent in looking through what are all the mentions of these exemptions, where did they exist? We essentially, the initiative, the final version actually isn't very long. I think it went up to 12 pages. Initially, I think it was 4. It went to 8 for IP3. But we just copied and pasted the animal cruelty laws in Oregon and just read through them, each one. Which Oregon, I will say, we do a good job of having easily defined statutes. Some states, I've done research for the presentation I gave at the Animal Liberation Conference, I guess last summer, or not this most recent, but the one before. I looked through the different animal cruelty laws for different states that had a ballot initiative process. They're not always easy to find and read. So Oregon, I will give credit, makes it relatively easy to find their laws. And the Secretary of State does a great job of documenting the ballot initiative process. Our manuals, I think, are some of the best in the country. We really do. I'm very grateful for all the effort by the Secretary of State's office here in Oregon. But yeah, looking through, it is diligent. It is diligent work to look through and make sure you're changing everything you want to change.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. I will read out Pam's question in the chat here. She says, David, really wonderful, concise presentation that I will share widely from the recording and ask people to post. Questions. Would you want other states to attempt to take this up while you are spearheading this in Oregon? What challenges are you seeing, and how people help to work with those on your behalf? So similar vein.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I would love to see people interested in doing this in other states and would actively be open to working closely to try and help with those types of initiatives. I think that there hasn't been any reason we haven't sought out anything else. It's just that our full focus has been on trying to get our initiative to qualify for 2026. But we certainly would not be, at least speaking for myself, I would not be opposed to other groups trying to take on the burden of launching something similarly in other states. I think I do see, Leah, I don't know if you wanted to ask relevant.
Well, yeah, thank you. It's just in reference to exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, because Pro Animal Future is the organization that just did the banned slaughterhouses, and I know you know them and you know some folks in the Measure J campaign. So you guys are all friends, some of you, right? And so, yeah. But what I've heard from the Pro Animal Future, just in their posts and things, is that their next plan is to not continue with a banned slaughterhouses campaign in other cities, but to now start doing again to ban factory farms, like in other cities and other states. And my question is, why? Why not continue? They were actually more successful than the ban not successful, I just mean they got more, they got a higher percentage of people under the banned slaughterhouses thing. So is there a possibility of IP28 and Pro Animal Future and, the organizations behind Measure J coming together to do what you're doing? Or are you convincing Pro Animal Future to not do another campaign to ban factory farms, but to continue with the banned slaughterhouses, but to expand and maybe include these cruelty exemptions that you're talking about?
Yeah. We are definitely all friends, and we talk both people from the Measure J campaign, Pro Animal. Also, there's an activist, Amit, in San Diego, who qualified for the Del Mar ballot, ban on pet sales or sales of just all animals, in not just companions. So people who are doing ballot initiative work, we are trying to stay in communication. I personally, outside of conversations, I live with Eva Hamer, founder of Pax Fauna and Pro Animal Future. There's definitely close ties, and we will talk about what we're doing. At least, while I try very hard to articulate why I care about this campaign, because partially of the quote that I mentioned, I don't spend effort trying to convince others not to do something that they're doing, especially because even though I feel very confident in what I'm doing, I also know that I might be wrong. And so there was something a YouTuber once said of, it takes about this much effort for me to believe something, and I have to be this much confident to advocate for that thing. And as a teacher, I definitely feel the same way. If I'm going to teach something to students, I always double check it, because sometimes I realize, I didn't actually need to believe that thing I believed. So I do feel really confident, and I do hope that other organizations, other animal rights groups join in on asking for this. And part of the goal of IP28 is to normalize asking for abolition in this way, to ask for banning slaughter, banning hunting, banning experimentation. I think it would be effective as a movement if a lot of groups came together around this specific ask. And so I'm not as involved in the day-to-day of either organization, so I can't speak to what their strategies are. I'm sure they're having lots of conversations right now about the election and what lessons they want to learn. But if there are other groups in other states that want to try and launch similar things as us, I think that is very helpful. I think it can be very powerful. I think, to the second part of Pam's question, what challenges and how can people help work? So challenges right now, I think, are in getting enough, well, we can get on the ballot either with volunteers or paid petitioners, and we have some combination of both. Right now, about 15% of our signatures are from volunteers and 85% have been from paid petitioners. It is exhausting work, and for people to go out, having this be a paid position helps meet their needs so that they can go do this. So we think that and in Oregon in particular, there has not been a state initiative to qualify with only volunteers since the year 2000, or since the 2000 election. I think 1999 was when they turned in their signatures. So every year since then has involved paid petitioners to get on a statewide ballot. I don't think that's like reflecting poorly on the animal rights movement that we're using paid petitioners. But so either strategy, either getting enough volunteers or getting the funding to hire paid petitioners has been a struggle. There are not a lot of groups that feel called by what we're doing, unfortunately. At least the ones that are the most well-funded in the movement right now have a lot of hesitation and reservations around helping us get on the ballot. We're trying to work to overcome that. And I think talking to people we know and making, and sort of that does normalize it, sharing this, sharing that you support the campaign helps with that. But yeah, having those hard conversations. I do think that there is some benefit in starting, even if it seems like you might not have all the support you need now, rather than waiting, because we wouldn't be where we are now if when I was first looking at this, I thought, oh God, I couldn't collect all those signatures in a year. I submitted the initiative text and we formed a petition committee and I learned as I went. And, we got 2,000 signatures the first 2-year cycle, not a lot. But now we've gotten 40,000 the second time and 40,000 so far on the third attempt. And we really do think that because of the timeline, because we were at least able to start with a good amount of funding for the first summer, we're on the best footing we've ever been to qualify. But that would not have happened if we didn't just start. And I think that if you are in another state, if anyone watching this ends up being inspired to try and do something in their state, I would say it's worthwhile, regardless of the present conditions.
Thank you, Pam, for your questions. There's a couple comments I'll read out, excuse me, from the chat. Also from Pam, the big ask is so important, while the rest of the movement asks for the smaller areas. I feel the largeness of this initiative is exactly what is needed, because it could also give those smaller asks huge momentum in comparison to the large ask. It really feels like a huge, courageous, fully honest, bold ask. Thanks, Pam. And Steve added, incremental change is less effective in the long term than putting it all out there and asking for full protection for domestic animals, as well as laboratory incarcerated animals, as well as animals abused in the wild, as well as other areas. Thank you both for your comments. Does anyone else want to add or ask anything?
Yeah, could I ask a question?
Go ahead, Mike. Yeah.
I know I've been working with a group here in Southern California to require state highway departments to include in the plans for building roads to put overpasses so that wildlife can overpass these nasty collisions that create. They're horrible. They're terrible when you really look at it. So that you build a highway through a wildlife migration corridor, and it's nothing but a disaster. So if that could be included in an initiative to protect, if there's anything more brutal than a 80,000-pound loaded truck hitting a deer, I can't imagine. And sometimes it's unavoidable, but if they built those overpasses, and it was required by the state highway department to do that, and it was included in the legislation, then that would alleviate that situation. I don't know whether that's ever been taken into consideration or not. And another thing is I worked on getting rid of 1080 and thallium and strychnine and so on public lands back in the 70s. And that was difficult with sheep and cattle ranchers. But it did 1080 and thallium are pretty nasty. And I think that I don't know that started to take hold. But again, that's too narrow. What you're trying to do is take care of all that in one shot. And so I certainly encourage, really glad to hear about what you're doing, and I'd like to see this done in California. So if we could get your email address, that would be nice. And I have a friend that lives in Eugene, that lives in San Diego part of the year and in Eugene part of the year. So, and she is very active. So I think it would be helpful if I could get this discussion to her, and also your email, and you could maybe correspond. It might end up being pretty fruitful. I don't know.
I just sent my email in the chat, and I really do like hearing the question you brought up, because it brings up a concept that I think if you enjoy academic text, because I'll preface it is a little bit more academic than maybe I would like sometimes, but the book Zoopolis by two philosophers, Canadian philosophers, they bring up a distinction of negative rights and positive rights when it comes to animals. The negative rights being rights from violence, exploitation, and the positive rights towards things that you're talking about, being able to have safe passage over, the positive, creating a society that's built with their needs in mind. What things can we do to organize our society to not just avoid harming them, but to actively help them? And what I like about the strategy, oftentimes I think, and it's come up already during our conversation, by asking for a really bold thing, it might make things that are more maybe incremental or focused on one specific task more likely. That's very possible. But I also like, on the flip side, our bold ask of negative rights will also make the positive rights, the things that are like even far afield from where we are in the present moment, that much more accessible as well. I think if we normalized, okay, we're not exploiting animals, it'll be much easier to say, oh, well, now that we're not exploiting animals, or at least we're considering doing that, what are the ways we can also protect those positive rights? I just think that conversation is a really interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mike, for your questions. We have another comment in the chat from Pam. She says all the efforts towards policy change on behalf of animals from all different sectors really getting out there all in these coming days and years is a huge energy towards bringing attention to animals. Thank you, Pam. And David, thank you for your email there. I know that'll be useful for people. If anyone else would like to ask or add anything at this point. Gay.
Surprise. Thank you so much, David. And thank you, everyone. It's really been invigorating and inspiring. I will, just taking what you just said, David, and the big ask, as Pam calls it, is that what we're really talking about is the foundation of this dominating human culture and way of being, because the essentiality and the definition even of human identity is the exploitation, is the objectification of quote unquote non-humans, we say nature, and animals is a crux. I mean, so are the trees. So when we're really talking about putting into practice, this is how I read it, David, that I really feel like this is putting into practice the shift from this, not to use wonky language, but from the dualism, the human dominating, the human exceptionalism, into a paradigm of unity. I don't want to use the word paradigm actually, but in the sense of non-duality. And so to me, it's like really putting is it a piton into the evolution of human consciousness in one that is based in peace, and that is based in reciprocity, and based in the values that I think there's a natural impetus to embrace. So, I think that in so many ways, I'm just, again, praising this is so wonderful, is because it is so very simple. It's Do you want this or do you want that? Do you want violence or do you want peace? And I think so much of all the things are really coming into to the point of a tipping point, if you want to call that, where people increasingly just have had enough of violence. And so to me, this is just really a pledge of peace, a pledge of change and transformation in that fundamental kind of way. And I will iterate what you just said. From Mike's comment is that, then something is referent, oh, wow, not having overpasses, or what I would say, stopping, stopping vehicles, period, closing roads, is a natural consequence of not being cruel to animals in that way, as well as to trees. And so I do think that simplicity as such, and that authenticity, also awakens the spirit in humanity, in individuals in that way. And I do think the way you're doing it and the way you expressed it is really helping empower humans as well, being able to act upon what they know from their sensibilities. And so to me, again, that's also because grassroots and this sort of, it's a revitalization of agency when we're talking about that with animals, but also it's the same thing. It's a relational type of thing that's going on. So I just wanted to emphasize that. I'll just say another quick story. I wrote a little piece about it, but I'll tell quick because I think it is illustrative. And that's, I read in a newspaper where this man was someplace back east, the river was frozen, he's trudging away to work, and and he sees this dog in the river who's drowning, who's going to die. And he throws off his coat and he jumps in and he saves the dog. And he's interviewed by a reporter afterward, huddled with the paramedics and everything. And so the reporter says, oh, wow, what made you do that? And he goes, I don't know. I don't even like dogs. And I just love that story because I think it really speaks for the revitalization and the natural impulse, even in humans. So I do have a couple questions, if I may, David. I could go on and on, but I really think that it's, to zoom back, this is the conceptual or the essential in terms of the internal touching into the awakening. This is an example of putting into practice the truth and putting into practice the understanding. So I'll just keep limited to my questions. One was, when someone says it, when you're petitioning and someone says, you say it's a bill or for stopping, prohibiting cruelty to animals, what do you answer when someone says, why? Why should we do that?
That's a great question. I'm trying to think how often I even get that question. I think almost drawing a blank as to a specific example, and I wonder if it even speaks to the fact that because we're asking for what we want, it's almost self-evident, like we want it because we want it, like it's we're asking to stop killing animals, and it's almost, I think people do realize why we want it. Sometimes there's like clarifying questions, and there's certainly people who are asking why we're doing it in this particular way. We get that question, I think, much more, like why do we think it's possible, or why are you spending your time on this? But I don't know if we've gotten necessarily questions like, why do you want to protect animals specifically? I would probably echo what you were sharing, that I think it's part of our natural instinct to have peace and to be nonviolent and to care for others. And I think that that's why I think that this is an extension of just the progress that we're making. But yeah, most of the questions are usually, why are we doing this? And I respond with a lot of the things that I've shared around, depending on maybe the other context of the conversation, either women's suffrage or about, maybe some philosophy asking for what we want or being authentic and those types of things. I'll share all of those pretty openly with the public. We're also very open about realizing this is unlikely to pass in 2026, but we want it to, we would love it to, but we think it'll take a long-term struggle. That acknowledgement, I think, for a lot of people they appreciate the honesty. Yeah, I will say the question reminds me actually of one thing that Jan mentioned earlier. A lot of people who eat animals still do sign, knowing that it would ban killing animals. And my favorite story, and I've shared this a handful of times now, was a pig farmer who signed, and she signed saying that she knew that this would ban, farming of animals. She said, "I'm signing so that I'll be forced to stop killing my own pigs." Mm-hmm. And that really, very memorable. I remember the where I was. I remember who she was, and just the conversation really landed. There are a lot of people who would support like just moving away as a group away from killing animals, but aren't necessarily either motivated or feel confident in their own agency to not eat animals, to not participate in those systems as an individual, which is one of the reasons why I like the ballot initiative tactic. It's really engaging us as a community.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's more data on the natural impulse. The other one was your comment about language, which I struggle with so much, and I really appreciate what you said about euthanasia. Because I live with a lot of quote unquote rescued animals and wildlife. This is our community. We call it Grace Village for that purpose, is to, tap into their needs and their experience of suffering and the transitioning. And so I am very careful in terms of, I don't say euthanasia, because I agree. I think that, again, I do sometimes I do use the word killing. And I also talk about supporting the agency of that individual, which I think is really important, and tuning in. So thank you on that. You mentioned wildlife management. I don't know if that's in the bill or not. I'm sorry, I haven't looked at in the details. I really encourage not to use the term management because it's a de-agentizing, it's a, and I think that I'm obviously a very strong proponent of banning hunting. I think it's very pernicious in many, many kinds of ways in terms of perpetuating violence among ourselves in that way, and very damaging. I do think that, the wildlife component, I will look at the in more detail, but the wildlife is also a very important element, is understanding them in terms of self-determination and as cultures, and as having self-governance and all. So I'm just talking more than I'm asking questions. I had another one. Oh, I know what I was to say. I found it very interesting when you talked about self-defense. That's in there. And again, I will be more diligent in terms of looking at the details. So for example, what came up for me was, for example, when a bear, quote unquote, attacks someone, or here, like in Ashland, there's been white-tailed deer who have attacked humans in the street and things like that. And so there is a retaliation. And I think it's important to understand what that means and why are they doing that. It's very, of course, the work that we do is to really promote the fact that nature, animals, trees, etc., are fundamentally rooted in nonviolence, in a credo of nonviolence. And so a bear attacking a human, for example, or the deer, I would say to pay attention to their history. Why are they doing that? Under the terrible stress and the trauma that they've experienced. So, I know that's probably way too much to put in the bill, but there is this notion of what really is self-defense. And there's a very beautiful quote from Gandhi, which I love and I repeat and I massacre, but basically it's from his autobiography. And he said, there are some things that we have to refrain from doing, even if it is for life. And he was talking about his wife, who was basically dying, and she denied, and he denied that the doctor would give her beef broth and eggs. And so I think that, that's this kind of a broader understanding of life, its sacredness, but also to bring in the fact of that these are not just objects, they're individuals with histories. And there's a reason that they respond in the way that they do. So that all that package goes into this, your mention of self-defense. So. I'll stop there, but thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm happy. I want to respond to both of those. I don't know if Jackie has something to add that for me to respond to, or
Thank you briefly. Yeah, just playing off since Gay threw out a great quote there, and I got to go at 11. I was I was supposed to leave at 10:30. That didn't work out, but that's because of one of my never doubt. I'm reminded here with this group, and then I got to sign off. I just didn't want to disappear because I appreciate this group so much. It's the Margaret Mead quote. I'm sure we all know. Never doubt that a small, committed group of individuals can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Right? And this is this group here, so I'm appreciative for all of you. And the other one, of course, is Goethe's quote, which I assume you also all know, which for me is IP 28 in a nutshell. Whatever you can do or dream you can do, begin it. Take the first step. Boldness, which is IP 28, has power, beauty, and magic in it. So thank you for what you do, David. Thank you, everyone here. See you next time, kids, I hope, and let there be many more next times. We're going to need it. We're in for the MAGA shit show.
Thanks for joining us, Jack.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Yeah, Gay, to your point, for both of them on language. So to clarify, wildlife management is the wording that's just in Oregon state law currently. So that's partially why it comes up. But I agree. One of the in terms of that term not being helpful. We do get a question often by the public when they hear that this would ban hunting. Why are we banning hunting, for instance? Those questions are usually around a belief that humans need to intervene in order to help wildlife species, which I disagree that we need to be, especially when it's interfering in terms of killing and hunting, to manage populations in those quotes. What I'll share is that what I share with the public is that this does not ban any non-lethal forms of wildlife management practices, so to speak, to emphasize that there would still be allowed to have sterilization programs, relocation, as long as they were not injured during that process. Not that we are particularly advocating for those things, but just clarifying what is and is not allowable under IP 28. What I do like about those conversations is it points out, to my mind at least, and I'm sure to all of us here, the hypocrisy of killing someone to help them. It at least takes those lethal practices off the table and says we need to find another strategy. If our goal really is to be helpful, what are some non-lethal ways of doing that? I think just to be, I guess, transparent and clear on that. With the self-defense exemption, I will share the actual language. It's situations of self-defense when it is necessary to defend against the threat of immediate harm to oneself, to other humans, or other animals. I totally agree that we need, if we really want to get at the root of the problem of other, animals acting aggressively towards us, there's probably a reason. In fact, there's always going to be a reason for humans acting aggressively, for non-humans acting aggressively, and understanding those reasons is going to be the way to ending those outbursts. But we did intentionally put that immediate harm because we didn't want the self-defense exemption to be interpreted too broadly. We didn't want someone to say, oh, well, now we have to kill these animals because they may pose a threat in the future. We wanted to make it very clear that this was only allowing injury in like a very immediate sense to try and get at that concern.
Thank you. Is it all possible to not use the term management in the bill, even though it's used in the legislature?
So the term comes up because we're removing that text. So it's not reintroducing it. It actually is removing it from law, but we have to quote it to remove it, if that makes sense. So the initiative doesn't create any sort of wildlife management or even reference it for that matter. It just removes that exemption from state law.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because it's intrinsic relocation. All of those things are intrinsically violent. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Gay. Molly added something in the chat. She said, peace, such a brilliant and poignant acronym for the initiative. I agree. I thought that when you were saying that earlier, it's really powerful.
I'll give Lucas full credit for that. One of our campaign members, Lucas Viegel, great activist, great friend. He came up with that acronym, so it's all to his credit.
Beautiful. All right, would anyone like to add or ask anything now before we wrap up?
I want to say something about wildlife management.
Go ahead, Mike.
You know, from my experience, I think it's more like management of people than it is wildlife. When you have a situation where you have a confrontation between two species, one being human and one being another animal, usually you're allowing people to go into areas who are they aren't maybe knowledgeable about what they're going to confront. And let's say, take Yellowstone, for example. That's a people management problem. When you look at the lines of cars and people feeding grizzly bears sandwiches out of car windows and things like that, I mean, it seems like people sometimes are just stupid. I mean, if you take a grizzly and feed him a ham sandwich, he's going to want another ham sandwich. And I just think sometimes we mix wildlife management with people management, and you see it on refuges, you see it everywhere. If you have to carry a weapon to protect yourself, then you probably shouldn't venture into that area, and people should be smart enough to realize that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great point, Mike. Great point. All right. Jan, did you unmute?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks. It looks like we're wrapping up. I just want to say, thanks for everyone who participated. David for, pushing through. It was great meeting you last year. And I'll follow up with that email, that IP yeson28.org. That's your email address. I'll follow up with some thoughts on stuff on there. So I'll be in touch.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Great seeing you again.
Fabulous. Thank you, everybody. Our next Living One speaker will be on December 6th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, when we will welcome Sandra Bloom, a board-certified psychiatrist and an author or co-author of a series of books on trauma-informed care. As always, if you enjoy Living One and feel called to support Kerulos, Living One, and all of our sanctuary residents, please consider donating at the link on our website, kerulos.org. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's been such an incredible conversation, and thank you so much, David, for your time and all of your insights and all your incredible work. It's really inspiring.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all for joining. I'm very grateful.
Talk to you all soon. Have a great weekend.